Chapter 2. The Open Road. "Ratty," said the mole suddenly one bright summer morning, "I want to ask a favor." The rat was sitting on the riverbank singing a little song. He had just written it, so he was quite delighted with it. Since early morning he had been swimming in the river with his friends, the ducks. And when the ducks stood on their heads, suddenly, as ducks will, he would dive down and tickle their necks, just under where their chins would be if ducks had chins. The ducks would come to the surface, spluttering, shaking their feathers at him. So now the rat sat on the river, in the sun, singing his song, which he called Duck's Ditty. All along the backwater, through the rushes tall, ducks are a-dabbling, up tails all. Ducks' tails, drakes' tails, yellow feet a-quiver, yellow bills all of sight, busy in the river. Slushy green undergrowth where the fish swim, here we keep our pantry, cool and full and dim. Everyone for what he likes, we like to be, heads down, tails up, dabbling free. High in the blue above, hawks sail and call, we are down a-dabbling, up tails all. "I don't know that I think so very much of that little song," said the mole slowly. "But what I wanted to ask you was, won't you take me to call on Mr. Toad?" "But of course, let's get the boat out." And they were off, with Mole rowing and Rat settled at the back. Rounding a bend in the river, they came in sight of a handsome old house of ancient red brick with well-kept lawns. "There's Toad Hall," said the Rat. "Toad is rather rich, you know, but very friendly. Not too clever, and he does tend to boast. But he's a fine fellow. Since he has given up boating, I can't wait to learn his new fad." "Hooray!" Toad cried, jumping up from his chair on seeing them. "This is splendid." He shook their paws warmly and danced about them, without waiting to be introduced to the mole. "Delightful residence," remarked the mole. "Finest house on the river," boasted Toad. The rat nudged the mole. Toad saw him do it and turned very red. There was silence. Then Toad burst out laughing. "All right, Ratty, that's just my way. But now you've got to help me." "With your rowing, I suppose," said the rat. "Oh, pooh, boating," said Toad in great disgust. "Sheer waste of time, that's what that is. No, I've found the real thing to do with my life. Come see." He led the way to the stable yard. There sat a shiny new gypsy wagon, brightly painted yellow. "There's real life for you," cried the Toad. "Life on the open road. Through wilderness and towns, the whole world before you, the finest camper ever built. Planned it all myself, I did. With fold-up beds, a table, and food. We'll have everything we need when we make our start this afternoon." "I beg your pardon," said the rat slowly. "Now, dear good old Ratty," said Toad, "don't be sniffy. You know you've got to come." "I'm not coming, and that's flat," said the rat. "I'll stick to my river, and Mole's going to stick with me and do as I do. Aren't you, Mole?" "Of course I am," said the loyal Mole. "All the same, it sounds as if it might have been, well—" The rat saw what was passing in the mole's mind. Toad watched both of them closely. "Come along and have some lunch," Toad said, "and we'll talk it over. Of course, I don't really care. I only want to give pleasure to you fellows. Live for others, that's my motto." During lunch, Toad was his jolly self, talking of the joys of life on the road, and somehow the gypsy wagon adventure became a settled thing. The happy Toad let his friends round up the old gray horse while he loaded hay in the wagon. Then they set off, all talking at once. It was a golden afternoon. Birds whistled. Travelers called out, "Good day." Waving rabbit said, "Oh my, oh my." Late that night, miles from home, Toad climbed into bed and said, "This is the real life for a gentleman. You talk about your old river." "I don't talk about my river," replied the rat, "but I think about it," he said sadly, "all the time." The mole whispered, "I'll do whatever you like, Ratty. Shall we run off in the morning and go back to our dear old hole on the river?" "No, no," whispered the rat. "I should stick by Toad. It wouldn't be safe for him alone. This trip won't last long. His fads never do. Good night." And indeed the trip did not last long. The Toad slept soundly well into the next morning. The rat fed the horse, lit a fire, cleaned the dishes, and got things ready for breakfast. The mole hiked off to the nearest village for milk and eggs that Toad had forgotten to pack. By the time Toad awoke to eat the breakfast, the hard work had all been done. He stretched and groaned. This is the gentleman's life. They had a pleasant ramble that day over hills and along country lanes. That afternoon they came out on the high road, and there disaster struck. They were strolling down the road when from far behind them they heard a faint hum like the buzz of a bee. A small cloud of dust was approaching quickly. From out of the dust, a toot-toot quickly called out. In an instant, a blast of wind and a whirl of sound made them jump. A magnificent motor car, with a driver hugging the wheel, flung a blinding cloud of dust, then disappeared, a far-off bee once more. The horse reared in fright. The gypsy wagon teetered. And then that yellow wagon, their pride and joy, collapsed into the ditch, wrecked. The rat danced in the road, shaking his fists. "You villains, I'll report you, you road hogs." But Toad just sat down on the dusty road, stared blankly, and murmured, "Toot, toot." The mole managed to quiet the horse, which took some time, but the wrecked wagon was indeed a sorry sight. Panels and windows smashed, axles hopelessly bent, one wheel off. The rat hurried to help the mole upend the wagon. "Hey, Toad," they cried, "come help us." Toad never answered. He sat in a trance with a happy smile on his face. His eyes were still fixed on the dusty spot ahead. "Are you coming to help us, Toad?" the rat demanded sternly. "Glorious sight," murmured Toad. "The real way to travel. The only way. Oh, toot, toot." "Oh, stop being a fool, Toad," cried the mole. "To think I never knew," Toad exclaimed. "What are we to do with him?" asked the mole. "Nothing at all," replied the rat firmly. "He's got a new craze. He'll continue like this for days now, in a happy dream, quite useless for anything. Come on, the wagon can't be fixed. We'll walk to town." "What about Toad? We can't leave him." "Oh, bother Toad," said the rat. They had not walked far, however, before Toad caught up with them. "Now look here, Toad," said the rat. "You'll have to go to the police station to complain." "Police station?" sighed the dreamy-eyed Toad. "Me complain of that beautiful car? Oh, ratty." "I give up," the rat said to Mole. "When we get to town, we'll go straight to the railway station. With any luck, we'll join a train that'll get us back to the riverbank by tonight." Upon reaching the town, they left the horse at a stable and hired a man to recover the wrecked wagon. Eventually, a slow train landed them at a station not far from Toad Hall. Rat and Mole led a spellbound Toad to his home. Then they got into their boat and rowed down the river. That night, the rat and the mole dined within their own cozy riverside parlor. The following evening, the mole was sitting on the bank fishing when the rat came strolling along to find him. "Heard the news?" the rat asked. "Toad went up to town by an early train this morning. He's ordered a large and expensive motor car."